Welcome to the Women of Distance podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Kramer. These are the stories of motivated women chasing big dreams in the distance running world. You'll hear from women who are crushing it on the trails, the track, and the roads. These are not just the stories of results from the top of the sport, but the full story of how she got there, the challenges, failures, successes, lessons, and life between the miles. Before we begin, I want to be sure to thank Open Fuel for supporting the Women of Distance podcast. Stay tuned during this episode and check out the show notes to learn more about their responsible sports nutrition products, company ethos, and why it's worth your time to check out what they're making. Another quick thank you to Summit Roasters for supporting the Women of Distance project. Good coffee, roasted fresh in my hometown. Find their website in the show notes along with a special discount code to help support them and the podcast. We'd love to see Women of Distance listeners supporting those supporting us. Without further ado, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy. Okay, I am hanging out with Sarah Carter this morning. Afternoon for me, morning for you. Sarah, thanks for being here. How are you today?
I'm good. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm still maybe a little bit fuzzy in my brain. It's been a whirlwind of a week. It's been a whirlwind of a week for you. We just met last weekend at the Broken Arrow Sky Race Series. You were second in the 46K. And I had already had this interview in my mind. It was just sort of a privilege that we got to meet out there at the same time. You have really been on a tear this year. Prior to second at Broken Arrow, you were also came over East Coast for the Rothrock 50K by UTMB, a new UTMB race. And prior to that, you were first at Desert Rats 50K. This seems to be the season of 50Ks for you. I'm really eager to talk about your year, talk about your season so far, what's coming up for you. But before we get there, I'd really like to just get to know you better and hear more of your story. So the first question that I always ask to really take us back is, where did athletics first enter your life in any form, any sport?
Yeah, we're going to go way back on that one. My very first sport actually was probably swimming and soccer. So I was a competitive
Mm,
swimmer for 9 years. I
okay.
played soccer until I ran into another kid's head and almost knocked out my two front teeth. I was taken out of a lot of ball sports after that. Um, but I started running in either 2005 or 2006. It's hard to find the race results that far back, but I did my first 5K as sort of an accident. It was a, community road race, and my dad was running it, as I feel like many dads do, and my mom was walking with her friends. And my mom thought I was with my dad, and my dad thought I was with my mom. So I actually ended up doing a full 5K by myself at age either 6 or 7.
That's
Um,
hilarious.
yeah, I was like, it's a funny story, and I think that experience, I actually did not have fun at all. So it's a miracle that I kept running after that. Um, and then I can confirm I did my first trail race in 2006. So I was 7 then. Um,
Okay.
so kind of got into running from there. I also started doing triathlons around that time. So I was a child triathlete, swimmer, and then I also competed just separately in running. And I think it sort of turned the running direction when I realized that, in the triathlons, like I was a solid swimmer and I was okay on the bike, but where I really made the time up was in the run.
Yeah.
Um, so I was doing a lot of community 5Ks at that time, and then eventually fell into like the junior Olympic circuit. So I did that all the way up until high school, and then obviously ran in high school. Initially, I committed to run at the University of Washington. So I did my first 2 years there. And then at the end of that time, I was actually cut from the team. So that's how I ended up at CSU. I went into the transfer portal, transferred to CSU, and I was fortunate or injured enough to be there for 5 years. um, and in that time, it was kind of my second chance at kind of the whole collegiate running and second chance at, you know, shooting for the moon in terms of what my athletic goals were. And ended up having a collegiate career that exceeded my expectations, let alone I think a lot of other people's expectations for me. And then once I finished up collegiately, I decided I'm like, oh, I'm gonna jump back into the trail world competitively and see what I can do there. And nowadays, like mostly trail, I've still got kind of one foot in the road world, and I have visions of returning to track at some point. Um, but it's just really been a fun journey, and I think it's not an exaggeration to say that running has been kind of my whole life.
Mm. I want to come back to you said when you were about 7, you ran your first trail race. I think that's rare. Talk a little bit about that. Like, how did that opportunity present itself at that age?
Yeah, so we had this local event put on by a trail runner in Arizona. So I grew up in Arizona. So this is all desert trails, very different than what we have here in Colorado. It was called the Cactus Cha Cha. And there was a 3 mile and a 7 mile distance. And I think, you know, heard about it through some local start getting like, oh, that sounds fun. Like, let's go do that. Um, and I want to say I did it, gosh, I think 2006, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. Um, so I ran that race several times, and actually it was discontinued in 2012 because the like founder and race director, he sadly passed away while out in the mountains in
Mm.
2012. So the final iteration of that race was in memorial to him.
Oh.
And I like to kind of shout this out because his name was John Greer. And he was somebody who, even from like when I was just this little kid, I could tell, oh, this guy loves running and he loves mountains and trails and all of these things. And even though I just didn't even really conceptualize what that meant in a big picture, like he was somebody whose passion for the sport was contagious. And so being able to be a part of that event, even though it's just this tiny local niche thing, was a really special way to kind of get into the sport of trail running.
That is really special. I was going to ask this question later, coming around to your adult trail running career, but it's very unique. Not only that you were introduced to trails that young, but that you were exposed to someone who had a passion for the sport that young, and that stuck with you. That's very fascinating. Um, I want to back up a little bit too to your transition here from swimming to triathlon to running. Expand a little bit. It sounds like through triathlon, you really discovered that you had a skill for running. What made you ultimately decide to go all in on that sport as opposed to swimming and triathlon in conjunction?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it a lot. Choosing between swimming and running happened with the transition into high school. With my high school teams, cross country and swim practice were at the same time. So it was as simple as, well, you can only be on one of those teams. Um, and with triathlon, I really did love it, but it was always hard knowing that a huge part of your success in that sport is equipment based. There's huge disparities of if you have a, $500 bike and somebody else has a $10,000 bike. Well, it doesn't matter who's the better athlete. It matters
Hmm.
who has the $10,000 bike. And I really, yeah, I enjoyed that. And I think, I would love to go back to triathlon someday. But I think the sport that I really fell in love with was running because it's just so raw. Like it's you and your body against the terrain, against other people, and kind of against yourself. And I like that it's kind of just this like simple. It's not an easy sport, but it's a simple sport. And I think that drew me in. And of course, I'll be honest, I think I watched both of the Prefontaine documentaries at probably age 7 or 8, and I was like, oh, I want to be like that guy.
I love that. I love that. I imagine I know the answer to this, but as you're coming into high school, making this transition to go all in on running, what were some of your favorite events? Were you more of a cross country girl, more of a track girl? What were your favorites?
Oh, I was probably more of a cross country girl. Honestly, I didn't come into my own athletically for most of my career. I had these little moments of, oh no, I am pretty good. And then I would sort of either have an injury cycle or like kind of level up in competition and kind of go back to being what I felt like was mediocre or less than that. Um, And so I think, for a long time, I had a lot of misconceptions about what I was capable of being good at versus what I wasn't.
Mhm.
So I always kind of enjoyed cross country because it was the closest thing to trails. But I learned to love track a lot more, quite frankly, when I got better at it. Um, if I'm being honest. And I do miss the speed a little bit, but yeah, I think my love has always kind of been the closer to nature and the grittier the course, the better for me.
I love that. Expand a little bit on that. And this will probably maybe tie into your high school to college and transition periods here. But as you mentioned, sort of like being able to get a taste of where you were good and where you had strengths, and then leveling up and then coming back to sort of a mid pack spot in the next level that you accelerated to. What what kind of a mental impact did that have on you, or what was it that kept you in and kept you working when you had those, I think setbacks is probably the wrong word, but maybe the perception of yourself changed?
Honestly, I think setbacks probably is exactly the right word. I have a pretty robust injury history. And so that was a lot of it. But I think another part was going back to sort of those pre-high school days. I ran for a very competitive club team, and it was a lot of girls who were maybe a year or two older than me. And you know how it is when you're kind of at like 10 to 14 age group. There's a huge disparity. So
Mhm.
I was just like this tiny little child, and I was just used to always being kind of a step behind everybody and always being like, "Oh, like, they're all better than me, like, I'm just here." And it was kind of the same way in early high school. It was like I was very much like kind of middle of the pack runner, like kind of, that like 5 to 7 spot on the team. So I was getting to travel and getting a taste of what the high competition felt like, but I wasn't actually competitive in it. And so I think, my family and my coaches and my teammates all had this idea of what I was capable of based off of, fairly enough, like my results and where I trained and where I raced. Like, oh, well, this is just kind of where Sarah's at. And of course, I had these pipe dreams of like, I'm going to go to Oregon and I'm going to be an Olympian like Prefontaine at age 24 and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And I think there were a lot of people kind of side eyeing me and thinking, well, she's a dreamer. Um, but I guess the first real jump for me happened like my junior year of high school. Um, my first couple years, I had struggled a lot. I didn't feel like I fit in very well on my team, and my performances weren't where I wanted them to be. And I think it all kind of came to a head for me like my sophomore year cross country state meet because I had barely made the state roster. Um, Went out, had a terrible race, placed like 57th, ran, I think, like 3 minutes slower than my PR at the time. And I remember finishing the race, and my coach kind of brings all of us girls into a circle, and he looks at me and he's like, I shouldn't have brought you and put you on this like state roster. Like, you shouldn't have been in this race. And,
Wow.
you know, I went home, cried, and then wrote this note card that I still have, and it's cheesy, but remember I was 15. Um, and it said, "You are going to be what you never were before." And then I hung it on my door. So like every day when I would get up for practice, I would, see it, and every night when I would come home, I would see it. And a year later at my junior cross country state meet, I won. And yeah, I ran, I think, over 3 minutes faster, won a state title. I led our team, making it to NXN for the first time in several years. And the colleges that I wanted to talk to started emailing me back. And that was kind of that first realization of, oh, this could happen for me. Like it wasn't just me dreaming and people telling me to maybe tone it down a little bit. It's like, oh no, this could happen. And then that theme has kind of repeated probably like 4 times since then. Um, you know, Going into college, went to UW, was very excited, and I was immediately the slowest person on the team. Like, not even a question, the slowest person on the team. I was getting dropped on easy days. I was getting dropped on cool downs from workouts. And then, like, 2 months in, I fractured my femoral neck. So, I think that was that huge wake up moment of like, okay, yeah, you had a good year in high school, but this college running isn't the fantasy you thought it was going to be. And then that came to a head a year later when I was cut from that team and then kind of had to reinvent myself all over again. Um, and it took years that next time too at CSU. Like I didn't have my sort of college running advancement or progression until like midway through my 5th year of college. So in between these moments of things going really well, whether it was high school, whether it was college, whether it was what I did last weekend at Broken Arrow, there have been these huge periods where I've had to not only be injured a lot, but ask myself questions of like, what am I doing? Am I making the right decision? I've had a lot of external pressure of like, maybe it's time to medically retire. Maybe being cut from the Washington team is your sign that you shouldn't be competing in college or shouldn't be competing at the D1 level or, you know, even jumping into the trail world. I had a lot of fear and anxiety at first that I shouldn't have done it because it wasn't going very well for me for a long time. And so I think having to sort of revisit these feelings of what am I doing wrong? Why is this not working? And am I ever actually going to be good enough has been sort of the theme of my career.
Hey folks, quick interruption to tell you a little bit more about Open Fuel. If you're not already familiar, check out their website at openfuel.co. They're on a mission to provide the quality sports nutrition you need without the trash and waste you don't. Their Ultra Fuel drink mix provides 60 grams of carbs and 500 milligrams of sodium per serving, while actually offering great taste at the same time. They have 3 flavor options. Mango Tango is my personal favorite, as well as a naked unflavored option. They also just released a new gel mix that is hands down the smoothest gel I've ever had. It takes about 60 seconds to fully mix their powder with hot water for as much gel as you'll need for your next run. Carry 3 to 4 gel servings in their branded gel flask or any size soft flask you prefer, and your nutrition is fully covered without creating or carrying any trash along the way. I genuinely love and use these products almost every day, and I'm proud to stand with the ethos behind the company. Again, check them out at openfuel.co and use code WOD for 20% off every order, every time, while supporting the podcast at the same time. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, we were going to come around to that in the trail world, but no, I'm especially that story that you told from high school. I think it is very typical for high performing people, for athletes in particular, to have a lot of internal restlessness and uncertainty, questioning themselves. You are getting it from the outside, from a coach specifically telling you you shouldn't be here. What is it in you? Where did that come from that you took that and turned it into a motivator as opposed to, and I'm sure it's something you wrestled with, but it would have been very easy to take that as I shouldn't be here and quit and walk away. Where did that come from for you to frame it that way for yourself?
I'll be honest, I think I thrive on proving people wrong. And I'm gonna be real, I think if it wasn't for that part of myself, I wouldn't even still be running today. Because what that coach said was not the first time that someone had said something like that to me, and it definitely was not the last time, and it definitely was one of the more mild times. Like I've been told a lot worse than you shouldn't have been on this state roster. Like you know, people have had a lot to say about what I'm capable of within the sport, what I'm capable of as a person, um, where I can or can't be in life. And if I listened to those people, I wouldn't be anywhere, let alone remotely close to where I am today. So I don't know where it comes from. I think it's just something within me that's always been inherent of I know what I want. And even though sometimes that feels like it's kind of past what might be reasonable, I'm still going to go for it anyway. Like the way I kind of phrase it, especially kind of during the harder times was, it oftentimes feels like you're beating your head against a wall. Um, and multiple times over the course of my career, I've just made the decision that I'm like, well, I'm willing to bet on the fact that my head is stronger than the wall. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. The wall could be 10 feet thick and I'm never going to break through it. But I'm willing to bet on myself and bet on the fact that if I just keep doing it, like the wall's going to break before I do. And
Mm,
so far, that's been true.
mm. Okay, come around to this early college experience and having that freshman year at UW, ultimately bringing around to a femoral stress fracture. What did you do in those moments? And I mean this from both a physical healing recovery stance, but also a mental stance with this huge transition to college. And now that college career is in question and you're injured and running, I'm sure, was not accessible to you for a while. Talk a little bit about that. I'm sure it's a long story, but talk a little bit about that year and that transition and what you did to move yourself through and move yourself forward.
Well, I'll be the first to say I did not handle that well. Um, it wasn't my first stress injury. I had my first stress reaction in 2014, so that would have been my freshman year of high school. And then I had my first soft tissue injury in 2016 and my first full stress fracture in 2016 as well. So then my freshman year of college, that was 2017. It was my third season-ending injury and my second stress fracture, so it wasn't something new to me, but that injury was very severe. The femoral neck, that's a very high-risk place to get a fracture, and they told me, like, based on the location of where mine was, if that had cracked all the way through, I probably wouldn't have been able to run competitively ever again, like, I would have been getting rods in my hip kind of thing. So that was a very scary diagnosis to get at the age of 18, in your first semester of collegiate athletics. And so it wasn't just this moment of, oh, I'm not running well and this experience like isn't the fun I thought it was going to be. It's not only was I not running well, I now have the kind of injury that I have to contemplate the idea of what if I, you know, could never run again at the ripe old age of 18. And it's like it's a huge identity question. Like when you've built most of your life around a sport and specifically being successful at that sport, and then suddenly that all completely flips as soon as it feels like it's starting to go well for you, it makes you question, you know, is this even meant to be something that I should be doing? Or like, is my body capable of doing this even if my mind really wants it? It was also around that time, I think my senior year of high school, I was diagnosed with osteopenia. Um, so that's kind of the precursor to osteoporosis, where your bone density is so far below kind of a healthy baseline that, your bones are becoming porous. And that's a scary thing to get also as a teenager because that's a diagnosis that is typical in elderly people. So to be, oh, I am barely an adult and my bones are already way weaker than they should be. That's a scary thing, and part of it I think is genetic, but another part of it was had to deal with fueling and training. I think the combination of training too much and fueling too little that I think is very common in this sport. And I mean, I don't know how deep you want me to get into these kind of topics, but there's a lot that goes into being a young person who grows up as a competitive endurance athlete, like especially as a woman, but like this happens to men too. Um, there's a lot of pressure to look a certain way because if you look a certain way, the idea is that you'll perform a certain way. And
Mm,
if you don't, that you won't, and having been running from a very young age, especially around the time that I was doing that in like the late 2000s, early to mid 2010s, if you look at who was on top of the collegiate scene at that time, there were a lot of people who were struggling, whether they were open about it or not. And it gave this idea that to be good, you had to look like them. There was also a lot of, I say subliminal messaging, but honestly, sometimes it was just completely explicit of like puberty makes you slower as a girl. Like, I would
mhm.
be maybe 12 years old at a track meet standing next to a friend's parent and, the parents are talking to each other and I can hear every word they're saying. And they're like, oh, yeah, so and so really hit her growth spurt this year. She gained a lot of weight. It's too bad she's slower now. Oh, yeah, that just happens. And then when you hear that when you're 12 and you haven't reached that point yet, you become afraid to reach that point because you're hearing people say, oh, that's going to happen to you and it's going to make you slow.
Hmm.
And so there's this idea that you have to prevent it or limit it or control it. And I think that leads to unhealthy behaviors at a really young age because nobody tells you, yeah, you might have a couple rough years, but if you let your body do what it needs to do, you're going to come out the other side stronger. No one's saying that. They're all
Hmm.
just saying, you have to look like this lean, fit, perfect athlete girl your entire career. And if you don't maintain that, not only is that a reflection of your discipline, but it's going to reflect in your performance. And I feel like that's such an unhealthy message that so many young athletes are either told straight up or experience through kind of those subliminal pressures.
Hmm.
And that was a huge part of, I think, why I struggled so much with injury, why I still struggle so much with injury, and why I had these periods of performance lull, because I was more focused on the way that I thought my body should be rather than giving it what it needed. And I felt like I had to control every aspect of my physical development or my development as an athlete, or else I was not disciplined or not working hard enough or failing in some way. And it was only worse getting to college because, when you're 18 and injured, your body is going to, you know, probably go through some changes that it was holding off on before.
Right.
And, you're 18, you're injured, you can't run. And then you're looking at these 22-year-old girls on your team and wondering why you're not like them because you're 18 and injured and not 22. But that's not, what you think. You think, oh, if I just cross train more or eat less or both, I can be just like them. And that's not the case. But nobody tells you that. Nobody tells you if you just wait until you're 22, you are gonna be like that. It's just, well, I'm on a college team and they're on a college team. So why aren't we the same?
Right. Right. I really, really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for giving voice to it. I think, like you said, it's not, especially at that time, is not something that was very talked about. And I also think there weren't examples of what the healthy process looks like. There was nothing to look for to 3, 4, 5 years from now. This is my peak, and this is what I can look forward to. And I also think at that age, it's really hard to look at the future. All that matters is right now,
Yeah,
and that makes it very hard, even if you had examples to look
totally.
forward. But I do think this is something that's changing now in the sport and for the current generation is people being willing to talk about it and share that experience and to live a different experience and be the example as well. And I think that makes an impact down into collegiate, high school, middle school, and people coming into the sport at a young age. So I really appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing what you went through. Talk a little bit then about this process after you transferred to Colorado. What did that healing process look like and bringing yourself ultimately to a point that you felt like you were grasping success in that 5th year?
It was very gradual and it was not linear at all. In my time at Washington, I struggled in pretty much every way a person can. Um, I had 3 stress injuries while I was there. My mental health was really poor. I had the worst academic period of my life. And I had never struggled academically before. So that was a nightmare scenario for me. And, just never running well, being consistently injured. Same thing, feeling socially. I had a really great core group of friends, but the team environment, I kind of felt on the outs a little bit, and part of that was probably me. Um, but it was just, I had built up a lot of anxiety around even just running with people, let alone racing. I was very doubtful of my abilities or whether or not people liked me. And I had a lot of fears around letting people down, especially coaches, because being cut from a team, I think that is a pretty explicit way to make somebody feel like a failure.
Right.
um, and so I showed up to CSU very excited for the new beginning, but I was also very afraid that, if I did one thing wrong, if I got injured, if I wasn't, the teammate that people wanted me to be, that, I would be cut from the team again, or I would feel ostracized again, or, it would be the same experience all over again. And, when it happens once, maybe it's the place, but if it happens twice, maybe it's you. And that was another fear that I had was,
Hmm.
what if all of this is just my fault and no matter where I go, this is what it's going to be? Um, but fortunately, that was not my experience at CSU at all. I do want to say, like, the reason that I chose to go there over some of the other options that I had is because from the get go, they made me feel wanted. Um,
Hmm.
I was talking to a lot of schools when I was in the transfer portal, and CSU, like, I reached out to them. They didn't reach out to me because I wanted to move to Colorado for a very long time. And they were very honest with me up front. They're like, "Hey, we probably don't have any money. Do you still even want to come on a visit?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I'll come check it out. Like, I've already been working in college. I can keep working. It's not a big deal." I went out there on the visit. They hosted me kind of last minute, and then what pushed it over the edge was they called me up and the distance coaches told me that they had negotiated with the sprints team to get some of their budget to bring me onto the team. And
Hmm.
so it's like they went out of their way negotiating with another event group to make CSU happen for me. And like I committed that day because I was like, they
Hmm.
they don't just tolerate me. They're not just saying, "Oh yeah, sure." You like no, they went out of their way to want me, and that set the foundation for what was a very positive experience. You know, it took a long time still. Like I think I showed up and I couldn't do track workouts with other people for months. Like I couldn't do a track rep in like the single file line like you normally see because I would have an anxiety attack. Like I would start hyperventilating and like cry because I was just so afraid that if I failed, they were gonna get rid of me too. And, I think because of that and because of some like lingering health issues and two more stress fractures, I really didn't come into my own until, yeah, halfway through my fifth year. So about 3.5 years after I transferred in. And they were patient with me that whole time. Um, I don't think they ever expected me to do what I did. And honestly, I don't even think I expected myself to accomplish what I did, but they still believed in me regardless. And like I can remember sort of the exact time when the switch flipped. Um, so for reference, I ran a 17:19 5K in high school. And so obviously breaking 17 was a huge goal for me. I wanted to do it in high school. I ran 17:19 in my cross country season opener. And then 2 days later, I broke my foot and obviously didn't
Hmm.
have a chance again to do that. And then in my first 2 years at Washington, didn't break 17. My first, you know, 3 years at CSU, didn't break 17. Ran 17:0, I think, like, 2 or 3 times. Tough. And then my indoor season of my 5th year, I was coming off of my 6th stress fracture, but I was like, "It's gotta happen?" And at that point, I was like, "Well, my career is kinda winding up anyway." And so I was at Iowa State and I ran 16:44 and I finished and I was pissed. Um, because even though I had done this thing that I had wanted to do for, almost 6 years at this point, I was angry because my teammates that day had gone faster. And not that I didn't want them to, but I felt like if they can do that, why can't I? And I think I ignored a lot of the context of, well, I was out all fall with a foot stress fracture. I was out the whole spring before that with a foot stress fracture. I wasn't coming from the same place, but in my brain, I was like, well, they can do it. So why can't I? And it made me realize I can't even appreciate this benchmark performance because I'm so wrapped up in what other people are doing that I'm not even proud of myself. And so that moment made me take this step back and be like, okay, what do you need to do to focus on you? And so I've talked about this before, but I kind of just put on like the metaphorical blinders. I was like, all right, you're not going to look at your teammates' splits. If you can't hang with them in a workout, don't try. Like, do what you need to do as you need to do it rather than try to fit yourself into the mold of somebody else. And so that happened mid-February. By the end of March, I ran a 16:08.
Mm.
Um, so I mean, less than 2 months later, and that was kind of the beginning of the momentum that shaped the rest of my collegiate career. So like I went on from there to I won 6 conference titles across 5 different events. I made an indoor nationals, I made 2 outdoor nationals. Like I helped our team to compete at 3 cross country nationals. I helped our team win our first cross country conference championship in like 17 years. Um, and so seeing all of those things come into being was even more than I ever thought I was capable of. Like for reference, like looking back kind of at those later years of college, I remember thinking in my mind, I was like, if I can leave here having run like a 16:20, I'm going to be overjoyed because that's what I believed I was capable of, and honestly, my coaches probably thought I was closer to like the 16:30, 16:40 mark. And I was like, oh, if I can run a 16:40, I think I left college with a 15:41, um,
Mm.
altitude converted, 15:44 sea level. But I think just not allowing myself to accept that anything less than what I believed I was capable of was enough got me there, even though I think at times it was also really hard struggling to feel good about anything that I did.
I think that self belief is a really important lesson, but I think the process that you invested is even more important. Like, I think that comparison game is so easy in this era of social media and sport, and especially running because it is just so vast and there's so much you can see so much data from so many people that but and I think it's very easy to tell ourselves the should story. I should be able to do this. I should be here. But being able to identify, I believe that I'm capable of this, but I need to take the process my own way and focus on where I am now in order to get here is such a valuable lesson. Obviously, for you, but for people to hear as well.
Oh, yeah.
I love hearing that. I love hearing that. Talk about coming into this super successful ending to your college career, shattering your own beliefs from where you started your collegiate career. What kind of opportunities were available to you coming out of college?
Yeah. This was when I was still in college, but this one moment really sticks with me. Especially having been in so many situations where I had coaches who were very clear about the fact that they did not believe in me. After making my first indoor nationals, I was sitting down with my college coach and she says, "Hey, Sarah, this professional running thing, like this could really happen for you. Like this could be realistic for you." And even though professional running was something that I wanted my entire life, since I was 7 or 8 years old, no one had ever said that to me before. No one had ever said that could actually happen for you. Um, and that was really special because it was the first time that somebody else had validated my dreams in that way. Um, and I'll be honest, I did not have any offers coming out of college from anybody. I got a lot of no's when I started reaching out to brands. And that was a hard feeling because, again, with the comparison game, I was looking at the career progression that a lot of athletes that I would say were comparable to me had had. And I wasn't getting those same opportunities. And so it was kind of this punch in the gut of like, oh, you thought you were good. You thought you were going to make it. Joke's on you. No, you're not. And it honestly forced me to revisit a lot of those same feelings of inadequacy, which was crazy because, if you looked at my resume on paper, it was something that I was so proud of. But then as soon as it turned into trying to make it to that next level, I was back to being, that little girl whose coach told her she shouldn't have been on the state roster. I was back to being, that 20-year-old being cut from her first college team and being told she'd never even make a regional meet. Like I was back to being that girl all over again. And it was a very complicated set of emotions because it's like the only people I had to talk to were people who either had made it in ways that I hadn't, or people who were looking at what I was doing and wishing it were them. And so it felt like I was in this very complicated gray area of I'm putting it all on the line trying to make professional running work. I'm putting external career on hold and I'm having my savings and, I'm going to all of these races and like just trying to get visibility and trying to, make connections and reach out to sponsors and all of these things. So it's like I'm not progressing in other ways in my life, but then to also not have the running feel like it was working out, it just, yeah, brought back those same sense of doubts of like, what am I doing? And the same sense of a comparison of like so many people who come out of the track world into the trail world go straight into sub ultra. And
Mhm.
most of them have immense success there because those skills do translate fairly well. But I was not one of those people. Like I didn't have a very smooth transition into the sub ultra world. Like I just wasn't racing well my first year. And that's actually what got me into the ultra side of things, was trying to find somewhere in the trail world where I felt like me.
Mm. Elaborate on that a little bit. This was one of my, and I don't know where the transition for you happened. What did you do with that? Where did that start to shift for you, that both you were getting the support that you needed to make this into a real dream and a real career for yourself, and where and how did trail enter the picture and that take shape for you in a elite competitive sense, as opposed to a fun and a training tool sort of
Yeah.
thing?
I mean, I knew I wanted to go into trail competitively for many years. I think I always had it in my mind that I'd be a multidisciplinary athlete. Like I love the track. Um, I haven't done as much on the roads, but what I have done, I've really enjoyed. And of course, like, I knew that I loved trail. So it was never a question in my mind that it was something that I would try to do. And I think what motivated me to go directly from NCAA into trail was seeing the transitions that like some of the athletes in the years before me had made. So seeing like Anna and Lauren and Christian and Mika and Talon and all of these people kind of just make that jump. I was like, oh, I want to do that. That looks awesome. They're doing it. So I would love to. Why can't I? And it was kind of a harsh awakening when my trajectory didn't look like theirs. Um, and yeah, that's what actually motivated me to sign up for my first 50K, which was at the end of 2024. So it would have been kind of at the end of my very first full competitive trail season. Um, and it was kind of a stretch. I did one 20-mile long run beforehand. That was it. Flew to Thailand and ran 34 miles with like almost 8,000 feet of vert. And I'd never run that much vert before in my life.
Is
Um,
this the Chiang Mai race?
it is the Chiang Mai race. Yeah, it was the
Okay.
UTMB Chiang Mai race. And I did it because it was a UTMB world major. So I was like, well, I might as well try to qualify for OCC in my first ultra, right? Um, And I did, and it was great. And that race was an enormous shift for me, both internally and externally. Like I knew within the first hour that I'm like, oh, this feels right. This feels good. Like I felt like myself in racing in a way that I hadn't in the sub ultra stuff. Um, and I think it's the same as if you're a 10K runner and you get put in a 1500. You can do it, but you're not really going to feel like yourself in that race. Um, and so that's kind of how I felt going from sub ultra to ultra. I was like, oh no, this feels like I'm running the race that I want to. I feel in control of myself. I have a rhythm. I love this. Um,
Mm.
yeah, ended up qualifying for OCC. That was also the race that caught Topo's attention. So I started talking to them not too long after, in that winter, and ended up signing with Topo in like early spring of 2025, and also ended up signing up for more ultras, of course. I wasn't ready to leave sub ultra behind yet. Didn't last year, and I'm not this year. Because I think I'm very much of the belief that, you know, having performances that feel like there's something to be desired isn't cause to quit something. It's just cause to continue working to build strength in areas that you don't naturally have it.
Mm.
But yeah,
I like that.
last year was my first year as a signed pro, and I got to do some of my longtime dream races. I got to run Sears and All. I got to run OCC. Got to take another crack at the Golden Trail Series. Another bucket list race. I got to run Pikes Peak Ascent. So it's just very exciting to finally.
One Pikes Peak ascent.
That was my first win. That was huge because I
Yeah.
yeah. I was running a lot of competitive races that I, wasn't expecting to win, but it still felt really special to not only have my first win in my post collegiate career, but to have it be such an iconic and like almost hometown race.
Hmm. So, this was a big question I had for you because on paper, it's clear that there was a shift last year. Do you attribute that to this sort of sense of belonging and joy and satisfaction that you found when you took that dip into ultra, or what else do you attribute it to? Is it the sponsorship? Like what changed over the course of the past year that has brought you to this shift?
I would say it's a combination of factors. I mean, I would be lying if I said that it wasn't in part due to the support of having a sponsorship, because that takes
Hmm.
a huge weight off of your shoulders in terms of your ability to travel to these races, in terms of your ability to spend money on things like physical therapy and, other like sports med services. And also it's like it's a huge kind of emotional boost of I am good enough to be here. I am, one of those people. I do think maybe that, hasn't caught up to the mainstream yet in the sense of I'm pretty sure in some of the Broken Arrow coverage, they were under the impression that I'm unsponsored. Um, no, I have 3, but, it was definitely like, "Oh, okay." It was an internal validation for sure, and just, like, the external opportunity that that sponsorship provides. Part of it was also getting my feet under me living here in Boulder. I only moved from an hour away, but I had to find work, and, feel comfortable in housing. And, I got my first job around the same time as the Thailand Ultra. I actually had my first day at that new job the day after I returned from Thailand. So I was a wreck. I was jet lag and food poisoning was great. And
Oh
then
gosh.
secured my second job a few months later. So it's like, okay, now my work schedule is kind of set. Like I'm making enough money where I don't feel like I'm kind of financially drowning. I'm able to travel to these races without having to cut my savings in half again. And just feeling more integrated into the community, like going to these races and always knowing a few people there and seeing familiar faces and feeling more confident to make new connections as well. And just I think the consistency and experience. Like when I graduated college, I started working with David Roche as my coach. And I definitely had, I think, a tougher transition to the trail style of training than maybe some other people have. But I think it really started to kind of kick in and my body started to adapt sometime in the last year. I think that was another part of it is it's just training started to feel better. And that boosts your confidence, right? Like when you can go kind of crush a workout or crush a long run and not feel like you're just kind of struggling through. Um,
Hmm.
and the last piece of that, I think, was kind of finding my little community and training group here in Boulder. Um, there were a group of us that all moved here within the same kind of 6 to 8 months and sort of started training together. And they're all stars, and I'm honored that they even invite me to things. But, it's been really cool to kind of get to not only train with, but to be friends with people that I have looked up to in the sport for a very long time and who are also just, like, incredible human beings.
It's amazing to have sort of like a team element without having to be a formal team, but more of a community. And I think for the most part, the trail community does a good job of being open and inclusive and welcoming in that way. So that's awesome that that's been a huge piece of making a difference for you too. Um, I wanna come around, I feel like we might be skipping over some story, but I wanna make sure we come around to this year because there's so much to talk about just within the past 6 months or so.
Tell me about it.
Looking at your calendar of races that you've already done for this year, what did it look like for you setting up a season, setting up a calendar, and choosing the races that you wanted to do? I feel like the 3 races I mentioned in the intro, you did, Desert Rats 50K, Rothrock 50K, and then Broken Arrow. Those are all very different, all similar distance, actually probably similar time too between Rothrock and Broken Arrow,
Yeah.
but very different terrain, very different environments. How did you choose what your season was going to look like? How did you choose those races and how did they fit in with each other?
Yeah, so I sort of structured my season around a couple primary goals. One of those was OCC, the other one was Golden Trail. And the third was kind of just mixing in a couple of individual races that were on my bucket list. So, because of some cancellations last year and early this year, my schedule actually shifted around some. So, this year I needed two UTMB qualifiers, one for this year's OCC and then one for next year. And I wanted to knock those out early. So, I was actually originally registered for um, UTMB Puerto Vallarta, but due to
Mm.
civil unrest down there, I wasn't able to do that race. And so that's what had me add in Rothrock, and I'm honestly really glad that I did because that was such a cool experience. So Desert Rats was my opener and my OCC 2026 qualifier, and then
Okay.
Rothrock was my OCC 2027 qualifier. And then Broken Arrow, it's a must do always. It holds a special place in my heart. It was the first post-collegiate trail race I ever did. I ran the 23K and the, Ascent 2 years ago, and then last year I ran the 46K. And in neither of those years did I have a particularly good race, but I'm like, If I just keep coming back, eventually I'm gonna have a good one." Uh, it's worked so
And
far.
here we are. Yeah.
Stubbornness pays off. Um, but Yeah, I think, structuring around those goals and then moving forward, it's going to be a lot of Golden Trail, and then OCC itself. And unfortunately, Pikes had to get scratched this year. I really wanted to do that race, but because of the changes with my UTMB races for this year, I had to add
Mm.
in Golden Trail in September. But I really hope to be back to Pikes in the future. And then my final capstone to the year, I joke, but if I make it that far, I'm signed up for JFK 50 miler. So that would be an exciting new opportunity, new distance for me. Um,
Okay. If listeners are watching on YouTube and they notice an outfit change, that's not an accident. We hit pause a day before and are picking back up for kind of a part two here. When we left off, we were talking about your race at the Rothrock by UTMB 50K. We don't need to go into big detail on it, but I'm really just curious to hear about this race. It's newly taken over by UTMB. This was the first year, and I think the course is slightly different than the historic version. I'm just curious what your experience was like. Would you do it again? What did you think of Beast Coast Roxylvania trails?
Oh my gosh, it was such a fun experience, and I am so glad that I went. Yeah, it was my first time on East Coast trails and definitely gave me a bit of everything. It's called Roth Rock for a reason. Um, I think, it's some of the most technical terrain that I've ever done, and it was exciting because that's not something that is my strong suit. So it was really cool to have this early season race kind of push me outside of my comfort zone to do something that historically I have not really handled that well. And it was a great opportunity to do all of that and enjoy it. The atmosphere was amazing. What I really appreciated was how the local and historical race kind of got to keep their unique touches, even within the context of it being a UTMB event. So I kind of had to laugh. There was a beer tap out on course in the middle of the woods, and I was just more anything shocked. I'm like, "Where's the beer coming from?" Um, or like, "How did you even get the kegs out here?" It was one of
Yeah,
those very remote aid stations. Didn't have any, but thought it was great. And then at the finish line, they had these homemade whoopie pies. And normally at the finish line, oh, here's a banana, here's a protein bar. I'm like, no, 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 no. Give me the homemade baked goods. Absolutely.
good stuff.
And kind of what touched me the most was the race organizers from the historical race. They were there, and something that they always did was woman and her daughter, they would make these handmade tie-dye t-shirts that say Rothrock on them, and they were given out as podium prizes. And they were able to continue that tradition to this year. So in addition to the UGMB award, I got a like handmade unique Rothrock tie-dye t-shirt, and I think that is so incredibly cool. And
That is very
everybody
cool.
was just incredibly friendly and encouraging. You could tell that they were following the race really closely in the sense of when I would come through aid stations, everybody knew my name, and, they were cheering for me by name. And that just felt very special. They did a great job at keeping what was an international event feeling like small town and real, which I loved.
I love that. I think listeners should know in North America, the events that UTMB has taken over, every single one of those races has retained the race direction of the original event. So all of the race directors are still currently involved with the UTMB version of the event. And UTMB comes in with support to, I think, improve upon the event, but not. Um, overtake or reinvent the event. Like you said, they keep a lot of, for all of the races, those classic touches from the original version and the things that are important to the community and the local community. Um, you finished this race in first, and then this was what, about 4 weeks before Broken Arrow?
Yeah.
How did that race and the recovery and what you learned and gained out there then translate for you coming into Broken Arrow?
Yeah, so I've raced 3 ultras in the last 3 months. I raced an ultra in, mid-April, mid-May, and mid-June. Um, Honestly, just getting my body used to kind of that bounce back and then return to training has been a learning curve. It's hard not to have little things crop up when you're trying to come off one of these races, recover while also retaining fitness. And, I'm even struggling with that right now with the turnaround between Broken Arrow and my next race. It's so hard to kind of walk that training line. But I will say, coming off of Rothrock, it was a big confidence boost in the sense that Broken Arrow is not a very technical race, but it's a long ultra because of its vert profile. Like it runs long. And I was a little bit nervous going into Rothrock knowing it would also run long just because I hadn't been running the mileage that I had hoped to be. So I was like, "Ooh, how is 5 hours going to feel on my legs?" And finishing Rothrock and feeling surprisingly bouncy, I was like, "Oh, okay, I can do that. I can handle this." So kind of taking that confidence into Broken Arrow, as well as a little bit of downhill confidence I gained at Rothrock, I think were, you know, really, really positive things.
I think that speaks to we in the beginning of this interview talked about your injury history and some of the struggles that you had taking care of yourself, taking care of your body in high school and college. I think your ability to do this many ultra marathons and recover well and move forward from them really speaks to the growth and change that you've invested over the past couple years here. And obviously that's showing in your results too, but sometimes like that recovery and that body feeling is more for yourself. You take the reward from that feeling, that experience. Um, okay, I'm really eager to talk about Broken Arrow. For listeners who aren't familiar, you ran this race like 25 minutes faster than you did last year, just 1 year later. I want to hear all about it. I'm kind of going to turn this over to you. Like,
Okay.
tell us, coming into Olympic Valley, when did you get there? How were you feeling, thoughts and feelings pre-race as you're lining up on the start line?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a fun and funky travel situation. So, for folks who don't know, I work 3 jobs outside of running professionally, so my weeks look pretty packed most of the time, and that includes on race weeks. Um, and when I was looking at booking flights, it was very expensive to fly out Thursday or Friday, and I was like, "Oh, well, Wednesday's cheaper." The issue is I work Wednesdays, 8:30 to 5. So what I ended up doing, the Tuesday night before I flew out, I worked until 7:30, came home, packed a little bit, went to bed, got up the next morning around 5, finished packing, went for a run, worked from 8:30 to about 4:15, so clocked out a little bit early, drove straight to the airport, got on a plane and flew to Reno. And then while I was on the plane, it turned out some of my other friends were on that flight, and they were actually staying with a friend in Reno. And they're like, "Oh, you should hop in with us." So ended up staying at someone's house in Reno that I had never met before. They were wonderful. It was Darren. He also ran the 46K, but it was just kind of this like crazy serendipitous situation where it was like a half baked plan. But it worked out. So yeah, I ended up getting up to Tahoe around like midday on Thursday. We went straight to Donner Lake for a swim. Um, and then just laid low Friday. And honestly just got into the mindset going into this race that, knock on wood, but things had been going right. Training had been going well. My body had been feeling good. I knew the course, I knew the start list. And it just kind of came down to every single factor within my control for this race is dialed. And all that's left to go wrong is something outside of my control, which I can't do anything about anyways. And so I was like, well, I know that this is every piece that I need to have a good day. It's just up to me to go out and execute that. Um, so I think that, the big thing is just not getting in my head about it and not making any kind of stupid mistakes in terms of like fueling strategy, that sort of deal, which was a huge contrast from last year. Last year, I was coming off of one of those infamous injuries. I had partially torn my glute med last spring. So
Mm.
I went into the 46K a year ago with about less than 2 weeks of consistent running under my belt. I
Wow.
did one 12-mile run with like 1,300 feet of vert, and that was like the longest outside run that I did going into that. So last year, my phone call with David was more about, hey, so what's my bail plan if my glute re-tears? Whereas
Mm.
this year, it was like, hey, David, like, how high up can I be? And so it's very exciting to feel the change in that. And I was still a little bit nervous just because I've raced 3 different events at Broken Arrow over 2 years prior to this last weekend, and none of them had gone the way that I wanted, and so it's still just this anxiety of, "Well, you've never had a good race here before, so it makes you think you're gonna have one now." Um, and I'm like, "Well, because I say so, because I have no reason to not have a good race."
I was
Um
gonna ask, like, I feel like I am learning this about you as we've worked through this conversation, that you really have a deep self-belief in yourself and you know what you are prepared to do coming into a given race or a given event. And so how did those feelings stack up for you on the start line? Like, how were you perceiving yourself in a competitive sense with the other women that you lined up with? Or were you really truly focused on your own execution, your own race, and how you stayed in control of what you could control?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was definitely a little bit intimidated racing people who are quite literally legends in the sport. Um, but I think what I took into it was the idea that I could go out there and have the best race of my career and get 7th or 8th or 9th, and I would be happy with that because it would still be the best race of my career. 'Cause I can't control the day that anybody else is going to have. All I can do is put my best foot forward, and that puts me where it puts me, and I would rather be competing in a field of the best, even if that means I'm not, automatically winning, than just go do things that I know I can win to feel good about myself. And
I
like
love
I think
that.
there's a time and a place for everything, right? But at the end of the day, when you're doing this professionally, you have to jump into the deep end. And that means races like this and races like, OCC and Golden Trail, where the field is going to be deep every single year and you just got to brave it. Um, and so I think, lining up, I was like, yeah, these women are formidable and any one of them could kick my butt on any given day. But I have to believe that I can do that too. Um, and so I was like, well, I'm here to compete. I'm here to show up and see what I can do. And I'm not going to know if I don't try. And that didn't mean, taking it out in the lead, because I did not do that. It meant racing strategically that first lap, but it also meant not selling myself short and being so far off of the lead pack that even if I had the best second lap in the world, I couldn't catch. And so how would heavy dating a little bit, but I mean, bad.
All right. So walk us through it. This is 2 laps of a 23K course. First lap, first 23K. Where do you feel like you were strong? Where do you feel like you were challenged? And who did you find yourself competing with in that first lap?
Yeah. So my goal for the first lap was to go through strong enough where the lead pack, whoever that might be, was going to be within striking distance, but not so hard that I didn't have any juice left for that second climb, just because I knew that that is kind of where the race is won or lost. Unless you're neck and neck going into that last descent, whoever's to the top of the last climb first is winning it. So I was like, okay, I have to have something left in my legs for that whole second lap. So I think I spent most of that first loop in fourth. Kind of who was in what position in front of me varied a little bit. But I kind of just, the time in the woods before the main climb, sort of tucked in, found a pack. And then by the time we hit the major climb, I was in a pretty secure fourth. I think like Caroline was behind me in fifth. And then, let's see. I know Danny, Kimmy, and Rachel were up there. Rachel had the lead for a while, and then I believe Danny was in second and Kimmy in third. Um, so I could see all of them. As you're going up these big, steep, open ski slopes, you can see everybody in front of you for quite a ways. And so I'm like, oh, that looks like a woman up there. Great. So I kind of just did my best to keep them in sight. And I feel very good about how I fared that first climb. I think I might have let off the gas a little bit too much the first descent. I was just worried about kind of blowing up my quads, and coasted maybe a little bit more than I should. But at the end of the day, I can't be mad about a strategic first lap.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And you've got a whole second lap to go. So, second 23K, you've got to do the same course profile all over again. You know exactly what's coming this time, and you had eyes on who you were with at the same time. So, starting that second lap, how did you feel approaching it, and what was the competition surrounding you when you started the second lap?
Funny enough, there was no one surrounding me when I started the second. That was after they had kind of built up more of a gap on me than I had wanted. Depending on who I talked to, some people were saying, 2 minutes, some people were saying 3.5. But what I was hearing and seeing was that it wasn't a small gap anymore. They had dropped me pretty good on that first descent. And I was like, okay, I need to kind of lock in this second lap and close that gap down as much as I possibly can. Um, but I definitely took that time in the woods the first few miles before you hit the open climb as like a little bit of a recharge period, just because, you've already been running 14, 15 miles and you're about to climb 4,000 more feet.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you're asking a lot out of your body there. And I was kind of surprised to find about halfway through the woods, I ran past a spectator and they said, "Oh, there's someone a minute up." And I was like, "A minute up?" Just a mile or two ago, they were telling me 3.5 minutes. And I was like, oh, maybe this gap isn't as large as I thought. So I ended up catching Rachel just as we were coming through the end of the woods before the climb. So about maybe 3-ish miles into that second lap, went around Rachel. And then I could see Kimmy up ahead. But I could not see Danny at that point. I was like, okay, she's built quite the gap. But these other two women are right here. Because I think, honestly, I had it in my mind that I'm like, if I get fourth today, that is still by far the best thing that I've done, let alone getting anywhere on the podium. So when I caught and passed Rachel and could see Kimmy, I was like, wow, I I could get second here. But of course, there's also the nagging fear in the back of my mind of, oh my gosh, they're all going to come catch me on the descent. Um, so about halfway to 2/3 of the way through the climb, I caught up to Kimmy, went around her, and then almost immediately face planted onto the trail. So that felt very professional of me. And it was on the live stream for anybody who wants to go experience that.
No.
Like, oh, so glad that that made it. Um, I was okay, just a couple scrapes, and then got up and carried on. And I am not big on looking back in my races. I think one, it's a fall risk. And two, I think it's this psychological idea of if you're always looking back, you're not looking forward. If you're always thinking about who's behind you, you're not thinking about who's ahead. And something a friend of mine told me that I carry with me in races like this, where I'm kind of running scared a little bit, is, for every one person who's catching you, you're catching somebody ahead of you. Like you
Mm,
never know what you're doing to the person who's like right there ahead. So like, there's no point in worrying about who's coming up behind. Like focus on hunting. Um, and that was kind of what I was repeating in my head, along with a simplified version of just like, be brave. Um, because when you're doing something performance wise that you have never done before, it's scary because you just expect your body
totally.
to hit a wall. You're like, oh, I've never done this before. So how do I know that I can?
Hmm.
And I think it just comes down to being brave and trusting yourself, like believing that you can do it. Because I think a lot of times our bodies are capable of more than we allow ourselves to believe. It's just hard to do it for the first time, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so I hit the top of the climb in second, still couldn't see Danny anywhere. So I'm like, okay, I'm not expecting to catch her. But what I have to do is I have to defend the second place now. Um, so I ran what I think was the descent of my life. Um, I was just pushing myself and with kind of reckless abandon that I typically do not do. And of course, I still would have gotten heavily dropped by a descender like Lauren. Um, but it felt good to finally kind of let go of those inhibitions and just like rip it downhill. And kind of by the time I was nearing the end of the final single track before you get onto the fire road that takes you down to the finish line, like I knew that I had second. I didn't know by how much, but like nobody was going to catch me at that point. And I was like, I cannot believe that this is happening. And I think I started talking to the bike camera guy and saying, I was 21st last year.
I love that. I
I was
love
like,
it.
I was 21st last year. This is so crazy. And he's like, I have goosebumps. I was like, me too, even though I'm sweating buckets. And so I really got to enjoy that final stretch going into the finish and like soak in sort of what that experience meant. I think it took me several days to actually soak it in, but it was special that I got to sort of enjoy that moment of high-fiving people and I don't know, just having the finish feel complete, I guess. Like I didn't have to think about anything besides the experience of it all. And that was very cool.
That is very cool. And to have put yourself in the position to be able to do that in the
Mhm.
first place, to not have to run scared necessarily all the way through the finish, but
Yeah.
to be able to open your eyes and really take it in. That is very cool. Real quick, just in the days that followed, in the week that followed, what did you absorb? What does it mean to you to have finished second in such a world class field?
I'll be honest, this last week has been so chaotic and busy that I don't even think I've really had a moment to sit down and think about this. Like if you looked at my Instagram, I haven't even had time to make a post about it. I'm really leaning on the collabs here. Um, but I know that this race has been career changing for several people, like in my close social circle. And so getting to have that experience myself, like I don't even know the depth of what it means yet, but I know that it's a result that I can carry with me with pride for the rest of my career. Because Broken Arrow is something that is only getting more competitive. It is only getting more well known. It is only getting more respected. So to place highly there in any of the events is the kind of result that just stands on its own. It also kind of feels like this full circle moment since Broken Arrow was the first race that I ran out of college. Um, I think 2 weeks to the day from the NCAA start line, I was on the start line of the Broken Arrow Ascent. So getting to have what feels like a breakout performance at what was my initiation into the post-collegiate trail world feels very poetic.
Yeah.
Um, but honestly, most of my mental energy this week has been devoted to my flooded apartment and the Topo documentary that's being filmed and my Achilles tendons that have started hurting. So I've
Okay.
got a few things
And you are
going on.
getting ready to travel across the country and race
Yeah,
again here very soon. Yeah. It's a lot.
it's definitely a lot. I mean, I fly back, I have, half a day, and then I get up the next morning and I go to work and the ball keeps rolling, like
Hmm.
I don't have a lot of absorption time when my life is very full of, good things. Like I enjoy my jobs and I'm very lucky that Topo is doing a film project about me. I'm not very lucky that my Achilles hurt, but it is what it is. And I'm definitely not lucky that my apartment flooded. But like we take everything good and bad and we roll with it. And yeah, I'm preparing to get on another plane in less than 48 hours. So, you know, we're rolling with the punches and I will post about broken arrows.
Life moves forward. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
be excited to read your full reflection and recap. In all of the things that you have to do, let's bring this podcast to a close and send you off to your to-do list. The final closing question I want to ask, and it's one I ask of everyone who comes on the podcast. I think, given the reflection that we've gone through in this conversation, I'm interested to hear your answer. If you could give one piece of advice to your high school age self, what would you tell her?
Oh, that's hard because I think about this a lot. Because something that I really try to live by is being the person that my younger self needed. Whether that's by word or example or all of the above. But I think if I could sit down with her and tell her something, it would be to just trust the process because some objectively bad things are going to happen. And even though I would never like want to go through those things, if I could go back and change them, I wouldn't. Like I wouldn't tell me to, not go to Washington or I wouldn't say, I would probably try to have a better fueling habits, but I wouldn't try to change history in a way that would have made my path easier. Because I think part of what makes us resilient and considerate and compassionate and brave is the fact that we've gone through things that have made us feel the opposite of those. But I would
Mm.
tell myself to trust the process and that it will get better and that you will get through. Um, and to hold that self belief close because a lot of people on the outside are going to, say the opposite of that. But if you kind of hold that internal sense of exceptionalism dear and like put that above any of those external influences, you're going to be just fine.
I love that. I really love that. And I love seeing what you are living now and what you have gleaned from hard experiences and successes and all that you have pulled together to put yourself in the place that you are now. And I'm just very excited to see where you continue to grow and evolve from here.
Thank you.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself and your learnings and your experiences. Good luck this weekend. Good
Yeah.
luck with your apartment. I hope that things get dried out while you're away. I'll be very eager
Survival mode
to
right now.
catch up again in the future. Yeah. All
Thank you so
right.
much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for
You
allowing me
too.
to tell so much of my story.
Hmm.